Steroids the sound.
Yes, there should be.
Back points and then it's not going to see that it's 315 slash change. Was it in the docs folder?
Yeah, it's in the
Okay.
Yeah, when you see NDT crouch, you send it.
And then the run to thing is what you're taking. Gotcha.
Let me just check over that, make sure everything's running. There are, I was like,
You said you think it's a little short?
I think, do you, yeah, sounds good.
What's your first grade against?
We had Long Beach and Speed.
Oh, I was gonna say, that would be a crazy one too.
No,
Did you win?
We did. Yeah. I was really scared that we were like Long Beach, like, because I know we're supposed to debate like one person. Yeah.
Well, this is, we basically, like thought about it, we were like, there's like one of four teams that we're absolutely debating every set. It's either you, Northwestern PS, Michigan State, and
Yeah, we predicted this one.
And so you cooked the fire case then, with a whole bunch of new interesting arguments that are joining out.
Yeah, Dustin's been locked in.
I can imagine. I'm excited. Do they give you all everything?
So,
Or does some of it stay in the VP Dropbox?
no, it's largely shit.
I mean, I just do a lot for them.
Yeah.
Look at you. Thinking there.
Did you all have Rumble?
North Texas GW. They read math about kinship. And we read case arguments and also the capitalism. Yeah, it was like it was a panel. The panel was Leah Maddie, Kane Cherry, Kate Marin. So it was like two like D3 judges and then like a Binghamton Bowdry arbitrator. Yeah, I the first thing is the one that I definitely wanted.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely the first thing, it's not that you have to have these things. It's just, if I'm gonna ask you for something, it's gonna be.
I think
If you're
good
gonna
enough.
number one, I make up number one.
Yeah. You just got it?
Yeah, do you have English?
You should be on it. If you're the scout, you should
Oh,
be on it.
I'm not scouting, but.
Volunteer as a scout.
Okay, what's your name?
SHIZA.
S-H-I-Z-A.
311.
That's where you're from?
USC.
Can I just make sure that this is the right email? Cool. We haven't had you yet this year.
Do what?
We haven't had you yet this year.
Yeah, it should be fun. I'm so excited. The NDT is so much fun.
This morning, I was not perhaps so excited.
That's
Last
fair.
week, NDT was so much
I
fun,
mean,
but
it's always so stressful before I one, especially.
yeah, it was the worst thing that's ever happened. But, we rebounded.
If the bikes are covered, good.
We had like a really D3 debate round one.
Oh.
It was like an app about kinship, and we had like Kane Cherry and Mia Maddie on the panel. It was-
What was the 2
we went for like performance things like this.
Nice.
Not the capitals, okay. It's technically possible for us to do different speeches.
Yeah, gotta keep them guessing, keep them on their toes.
Well, the cards are just the same, so I'll send one team out there.
Yeah, have the stream muted.
I don't know. I'm trusting him to take care of all that. Because he's typically good at that sort of thing.
Man, that's some practice, that's for sure.
It looks in. Who's the other person on the panel?
DJ.
DJ. I just hit the change. I don't know what the fuck they're taking this, but you might. I think it's a change. I don't know what the fuck it is.
Hey, sorry, do we have a breakout room for atrium 245?
Am I still connected to
I guess we're still.
Alright, just a second, let me.
No, DJ's here.
Okay, we're good.
I was just wrong.
I closed it and I assumed that would close this one, but.
Bye.
Yeah, how's it going? How's it going?
Yeah. All right, Michigan, are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Like PK, DJ?
Let me open it. I'm good.
Okay.
This open letter is a story about desire. There are days when I consider telling the story, when the day is all done, when the last speech is finished, when we've all sat down in that anxious moment between 2AR and RFD, between I'm in and I voted, between I voted and 4. There are days when I think about the postcard the Kansas Letter Project got in the mail, when we had to hunt it down because it got lost in the mail, when we never found it, until Scott Harris walked into Bailey 408 and said, "Hey, I think this is for you." There are days when I think about what it means to have your writing called beautiful, called emotional, called moving, called important. When someone asks, "What might you die for?" it might be enough to say, to shout, "Death before any transition," like I have all the times before, and it could end there, because how do you explain such a believing of all the people you met with such a belief, with such a history, with such a politics? The spark that lets us love life so much we choose this brokenness. Just have a taste of it, because when you didn't, well, that itself was a kind of dying. How do you explain that all of the competition, all of the speaker points, all of the ballots, all the RFPs, all the time I spent with coaches, all the time I spent meeting people, doing drills, sitting in Ricker's office, giving redos, none of that felt like anything other than a game, none of that felt important, none of that ever felt like something different than competition until I learned to say transsexual. There might not be a way out of the storm of transantagonism, but it can be weathered.
Buckner, in 24, transness is not something you can be or become, but something you believe in, a theology. Nobody is born cis. Everybody is constructed and brutally maintained. We become cis through brutal trial and error by having our transness exercised. We internalize the socio-sexual contract. We try to find faith and equilibrium. If only they understood what it was like to be trans, they would come around. They cannot. That makes it beautiful and horrifying. We consider transness theologically as unbecoming, something you are possessed by. I move away from scientific proof of trans life in favor of a theological term that rebukes the desire to make transness knowable. Like apophasis allow us to speak to the viscerality of transness, seeing transness as unknowable signifier of the present absence of cisness. Apophasis characterizes truth through denying its assertion, as in, I love you, but I can't love you. I consider it is trans all the way down. Apophasis troubles invisibility by departure from counterpublics formed in response to the trans debate in favor of incommunicability. Erin Still, a white trans woman from Missouri, tweeted that she'd been interviewed by AP News about DIY hormone therapy. Her longing for public infrastructure coupled with her dry snitching cannot be explained as anything but whiteness. Still's decision to disclose the details, to occupy the limelight, expresses compulsory interlocution, a habit of affirmation which dignifies the trans debate with a response. The nature of trans antagonism could achieve synthesis only by recuperating civil society and banishing its outside. Appeals to rhetorical civility defend a coercive demand to work within the proper channels which routinely abandon many. To choose transness is to know the risks and accept them anyways. We take our cue from the subterfuge rhetoricity practiced by the trans women of color who run networks of DIY transition. Unlike Publix, the undercommons goes without saying to secure the material conditions of existence. It has no time for deliberation. If you don't know, why ask? We seek not to settle the trans debate, but to render its questions inoperative. Apophatically held, our faith offers strategies of survival, renewal, and abolition. We must change things or die. All of us. Have faith.
This open letter is a story about desire. I learned to love transness, but I also learned that I would die for it, that shots in the thighs became material, imperative, existential. It's just that realization didn't make anything better. It didn't stop my endocrinologist from threatening me. So every time I storm into Ricker's office to ask what on earth could possibly make any of this worth it, he reminds me that, you don't have to do this. But if not this, what else? So I cry, sitting there hearing a grad class across the hall, hearing someone who's speaking drills down the hall, hearing the squadron down the hall, hearing him not know what to say, because what could you say? This interaction is quite short. I say, sure, I don't know, I'll think about it. I have to be at work in 10 minutes. I'm not sure there's anything that he could say. Words cannot provide depth. Words cannot capture what the rush of argument feels like. I don't know what words I could say that could capture the brutality, the optimism. The shit that I need is the shit that's killing me. The feeling of being damned if you do, damned if you don't. I know that transition will not make this better. I will do it anyway.
2. In 18, dysphoria is notoriously difficult to describe. It feels like grieving. It feels like having nothing to grieve. Just ask the Heritage Foundation, who shut down the Gender Identity Clinic on the grounds it is not only fair to refuse trans people the care they seek, it is also kind. A liberal counter-narrative exists. Transgender people are not deluded, they are suffering. But by focusing on minimizing pain, it leaves the door open for care to be refused. Both writers engage in compassion mongering, peddling bigotry and sympathetic concern. They differ on how the gate is to be kept. People transition because they think it will make them feel better. This is wrong. I feel demonstrably worse. I've watched my dysphoria balloon. I was not suicidal before hormones. Now I often am. I tell you this not because I'm cruising for sympathy, but to prepare you. I still want this, all of it. I want the tears. I want the pain. Transition doesn't have to make me happy for me to want it. There are no good outcomes in transition. There are only people begging to be taken seriously.
I want you to take me seriously. I do not know how to explain to you how to do this. I will require it of you anyway. I've spent so much time being serious. I've spent so much time writing for this tournament. I am out of words. I do not know what else I could say about my life to prove my faith. Sometime between all of this writing, I have to live. Taking that seriously might emerge from knowing that I will not abdicate my faith for the devotion that it demands. Before you consider asking that of me, I must know. What fact can convince a reactionary that I am not deluded? What statistic can convince an ally that I am not suffering? If you don't know, why ask?
Harry, in 18, speech acts operate as contracts. They fit into a grammar through which gender is made. Behavior is naturalized by learned grammars. A performative utterance is participation in law. A passionate utterance is an invitation to the disorders of desire. Inviting an exchange rather than invoking a procedure invites engagement apart from competition and connection outside that to which we are conditioned. Debates aren't really about words, they're about social relations and are always going to be contested. The appeal leads us to reconsider fairness and unfreeze blank proceduralism. It allows us to be with one another. This is the pursuit of the iterative committing to a just society. We ought not debate without attachments. We exist in a grammar whereby relations are so often so brutal. In confronting you, I demand a response, making myself vulnerable to your rebuke. It reminds us that naturalized human performances are not natural, but matters of faith. So what if we start here and build out the alternative grammars? To heed the passionate utterances more than agreeing to doctrines is to allow for a resonance to begin our revolution.
This open letter is a story about desire. We are not here by choice or chance. We begin with a timer, except that begins with a plane ride where a name is called never mind because my gender is not my own, except that begins with body because my gender is not my own, except body begins with a syringe because my gender is not my own, except syringe begins with the transsexual girls every day because my gender is not my own, except that never really begins because faith has been ever present, a response to the desire for depth that debate inaugurates because the National Debate Tournament is not subtended by a pool of competitors that stumbled upon the districts tournament, but with all that debate takes and takes and takes and takes, and all that I give and give and give and give to have my writing called beautiful or important or timely, I would not describe this as choice. I cannot help but speak. Nothing I say helps because my gender is not my own. So I say girl, so I say woman, I say this as repetition in repetition of all that I believe, of all that I am. I speak not because I hope it will help, but because I can do nothing else. If we are not here by choice or chance, then this is a choice not to begin again. It is a choice to stay devoted. After all, it was Sylvia Rivera that stole food for the table and called it fingers for Jesus. It was Marsha P. Johnson that was the saint of Christopher. It was street transvestite action revolutionaries who evidenced the devotion when they made a way of living out of no boiler, no plumbing, no power on East 2nd Street. A theological practice that questions how you wish to live and for what or for whom you might die. If we are not here by choice or chance, then all I have left is a belief. So this is a double down on a theology for believing death before detransition.
Here's the process.
Yes.
What does the panel voting after this do, or in this debate do?
It affirms that the affirmative is good.
What does it mean for the affirmative? Is it the performance? Is it?
It's the performance method and theory in the combination of those.
What is the value of saying that the one's performance was bad?
Because it creates the possibility for encounter. Our Perry evidence says that creates the affective resonances that allow us to begin our revolutions.
Wait, so why does negation of performance allow us to begin the revolution?
It's not negation of performance. Rose said theory, method, and performance.
So yeah, it's not performance in the abstract, but the important part of it is the line that the Perry evidence has about in confronting you, I demand a response, making myself vulnerable to your rebuke. It's that vulnerability, that process of encounter that we have said makes transsexual life possible.
Okay, I guess the one AC has said a couple times, all I've got to lose is the faith. What is the faith in?
You didn't say that. You weren't listening.
I'm sorry.
You weren't listening, we did not say that. So it's not in the 1AC.
Yeah.
What is a passionate utterance?
A passionate utterance is the invitation to the disorders of the desire. It's the encounter stuff I was talking about before. It's how, the 1AC starts with the narrative about what we desire, how we desire it, and how that's shaped by our participation in debate and our argument is that the process of, engaging with that, thinking about that, and providing the possibility of encounter as for Perry is crucial to, enabling us to, live in the world.
Why is debate critical to those encounters?
Well, I think that the whole 1AC is about debate and why debate is critical. Like our argument is about the negotiations with the desires that shape how we interact with debate. And then we've said that the way we should respond to that is by a staying committed, a devotion, faith as a methodology to interact with the world and with debate. So like the reason why debate is important is because the 1AC is talking about debate.
Okay. I guess the Harry card at the end of the 1AC says we should reconsider procedural things like fairness and quote swim in the substantive water.
The active verb here is unfreeze. So, the 1AC is not saying that fairness, proceduralism have no value, but then instead we can't understand them out of context of how we all come to this activity, which is the argument that the 1AC is made about, we're not here by choice or chance, that there is, a set of commitments that we all have that allow us to debate here, and that possibility, the fact that, our conditions of possibility are constrained by who we are, how we participate in debate, means that debate has to be about something more, and I think the 1AC has spoken to that pretty extensively.
What does it mean for transcendence to be a theology?
It means it combines two things. First, it combines a structural claim about transness as neither being nor becoming, not a possession that one has nor a process, but instead a believing. You said that it's something that one has faith in, and then understanding transness theologically gestures to a set of politics of devotion, which we have described as in material terms as, Marcia Johnson as the saint of Christopher Street, Sylvia Rivera stealing fingers for the food and calling it stealing food for the table and calling it fingers for Jesus. Those, I think, are examples of how that structural analysis gestures to material politics.
Okay, the one to ascend, it's 4 in the case.
Sorry. I think we switched chargers now, because this one's next to the charging.
So you said 4?
Yeah, we did switch chargers. Sorry, I got distracted.
I am good. First off, top cut, and then I get you down to rejoin non-topical apps, US of GB, 3 branches, US of 16, US of G, 3 branches, like civic injury, and judiciary adopt to put in the legal effect, 92, defension, without 22 operation, against the constitution, will allow clean energy policies, and the rules of guide renewable and possible without making C 20 energy policies will appear, back to the German energy, we regularly manage and provide incentives and tax subsidies, some infrastructure, something like caps, taxes, restrictions, or regs, MPIs, must be carbon opportunities, and alternative MPIs, fine, to ensure the president, and the mission of the appears, the opportunity, and instrument, is not qualify only interpretation of the certainly set list of bound political topic, asking fairness, which outweighs one, two, good debates again, and both sides are victory, recent, they'll point out job arguments for the 2C after 9 minutes, is mutual reliance upon fair adjudication and penalty for fairness, rules of rejoinder, creating false policies and consumption, 2, terms are office fair, procedural, like say, 1, the physiological benefits, rejecting it, inducing negative emotional and cognitive effects that spill over interpersonally, to the fairness is fundamental norm of parity and cooperation, control, fair species, survival, and attention, fairness is critical to social interaction, concern, proper fairness is the universal fairness, and also seeing the conduct is a fair, harmony, and some unfairness, regard higher information of the expression of the Jefferson, the Asian reality, and being related to control, was linked to an inhibition of the reaction, not binding emotion was being responsible, offers that there is a satisfaction to the motivation, first of first of the for your process, like first week, this is your operational is a strong mutual responsive mechanism, where you're having to intervention of the mutual and maintaining peaceful society. 3, only our office and mutual behavior cannot shape subject to this competition cause an echo chamber, turning their office the base between the internal and actional and then the explicit organized running to use people become more convinced of their prior piece and members of just more rather than improve the choices are influenced by our perception. People want to realizing each other themselves about what they ignore, explain away or discredit. So legal research reasoning about where one ignores without engaging. Legal research reasoning where one ignores without engaging. About the context where interactions and matching discussion for judgmental problems that do not have the right answer to result. That's our communication leads to better outcomes. The accounts and accurate ideas. And the relation, tendency to go and attention.
unless someone else someone else consists of time play up the structural optimism rule relation, and unless the emergence which is marked by highly informational and then information and order must be choices regarding who to engage with the exchange corresponding government for political engagement with the exchange and the false these source will not change by next up the calculate once you by consideration the undercomes is too abstractive and reactive pursuing material change for the university web and it is used to by the undercomes one units possible to send the repeating university accessible to figure out what is the right of the document on the display for a negative factor about where can we find the undercomes around the number start show that there is a nature of visualization of each go structure and federal general and then even south concept to be conventional conversations these reasons and then one versions of what happening on is inclusive is particularly utopian undercomes that risk is excavating this problem how to identify a utopian fighter or just however by these sources to be identified having on your city and the concept of the material reference to the undercomes is level this is more critical statements being more than poetry and resistance is a strategy just without a utopian endeavor we do not resist the world to be the undercomes we need something more their lack of concrete demand on the state prevents effective solution to illiberal capitalism government 22 and the progress is over those of not having German progress contest capital large scale all distributed investments that change is possible if you're a great nervous and really accepted and neoliberal common sense and country this is discovered for the majority of the ability to envision under world future as this is the right of the unified narrative search of and it was pointed out largest of the reject progress from the favor of neoliberalism in absence of probable passivity capitalism facilitates a societal transforming discrimination policing and the construction of system of binaries tips in 20 people over is the reality of capitalism and people live below average people based on the mass discrimination eviction are 30% of another 30% people who pursue sex one sexual attributes people are police and members of capitalism also do this individual victory they would also policing and transferable benefits of visibility and liberation of operation trying to learn capitalism to against future of the general comes into the friendly capitalism really discrimination maintain the precarious capitalism the capitalism jobs police the violence of people to countries are struggling with and countless youth and it's really lots of numerous existential connections trying to environmental destruction terrorism over resource deterioration global checkers the result is that it is average of right-wing populist resulting in activities involved in safety country environment is all the person like really very close to the self it actually be like kind of showing the house with the draft millions of proportional creation limits including water fishes and minerals cover the lowest climate soil lost become which is lost which is not rises given to decline there's prevention to be second discontent further shopping system whatever transformations before political organizing in both places affective strategies to abolish capital grant to transformations of the responsibility of the radical revolution organizing works as we provide all this in over 20 years the effect the revolution force just through average activism and the utilities moderate control all revolutions and markets amazing and available to us by subject to just audience in terms of all markets we go Representing the delays and integrities of the state, this is not a fight unique to Canada. People rights to the discussed not only violence, but joys, including our sense of beauty, the struggle, some way, individual result, and much else classified as celebrating and learning from. Next up, substance kind of thing, that's government, your main lawsuit, substance, peace, and also action for permutations. I guess not allowed as that's critical to clash here by guaranteeing the neck a stable source of ground. We're going to start writing absence rejection of the one C substance called acid rain, believing a solution by causing the health problems from function also sometimes basing out or reducing emission self-remission, and particularly which causes acid rain, that causes global ecological destruction, contributing to the legitimacy the gas up the Russian people include the sulfur toxic acid rain acid runoff and the rain chiefly acidifying the oceans of toxicity from the activity of the sulfur dioxide water causes disease response in history. Next up, scale spike interpretation to meet their burden improve the atmosphere for the upper and lower boundaries of the scale of victory. You got to go until you want to scale into ultras of biology depending on scale of inquiry. It is not just the things that you better small place but not change all options must be defined either scale of interactions scale just but nothing needs to the scale reveals relationship that are really set up here because they are not observable of the control server of them because there's only about scale that are myself skills are arbitrary but not anything but reference scale functions of biology technology needs to origin yourself and say that a phenomenal measure to calibrate ourselves as well because they necessarily mechanical logic to any mode of inquiry with technology is one just scale prefer one ground along the option to scale of comparison supposed to be seesaw principle and non-reciprocal because they can defend impacts of methods that operate at different scales. The image is already done. Critical rigor of the scalar specification ensures that critical base become generative instead of belonging to self-arts scale. This in case the calculation 21 review and represent the issues are clear. Numbers of concern are shared. It can be design system does not need to reduce it. Does not need to be an eco term. We already have. We are supposed to modify about reality, which was the irrelevant first version formula that exists in these question arises. We never have to that there is only one way that experience or when we talk about what is it apply. We know what is not being accounted for. Moses alluded to much earlier about the tiny behind ego way of the ego because your fail. These solutions can induce emotional bewilderment from which we can have a conversation. Then positions was right because we get to involve conservation and conservation and discord because that is something that goes authority or system understand your rules and energy. 3 your neck on every other flow lack of specification you should get to debate about skills. Number 4 now case presumption A vote negative on that rather proof they are performed the method. There's no reason why voting absolves anything. B uses offense was break to two members must be on the match by institutional materials in this organization. So to be on the two institutional defense of microculture politically socially logistically they're going to value more we should know organize we see that the emotion to reflect this space up every member school in the some reason you're from you work as a represent cultural communities are about that you can share with the ideology of professionals and other institutions and materials just idea we're like the ideology can be not that denominated institutional leadership over here with also most important to hear at some point of the politicians virtually enthusiastic about other bad words when we saw those debates running through with a bad faith actions who like sister they're interested in military action aid and looking for political capital there's such years of that military effort and radically reduces the military will do or it will do nothing and you know who fails to prevent the two universities forces on serious military violence to make sure insular adversarial strategies reinforce factions in public and free actors and adversarial agreements for requests and reading letters and adversarial changes of the changes have consequences of factionalism creation representative strategies and tactics and adversarial strategies and we should do they cannot offer material changes to make sure inside conflict better they do justice tracing duties 1122 we are very clear with and also and then just out of that and this little RP take on issue with the job or wage our workers were leading in real material waste culture given our provisions the expressive duties and we should be able to reach and more behaviors and benefits of disciplines outside our own to the extent theory feature our jobs books and the good investments and improving material conditions fail alone is insufficient develop on 22 trips to the community work this has prompted and the spikes in fundraising event always has to why we have the weekend of everyone. Whereas the event is not in proportion to what we could be offering to the utilization. Your powers reaching 10% of the percentage of all the resources you use for the community supervisor resources which you scared to be outside others more is necessary to operates council be application unless your course are immediately needed policies that assure access to all of who started ranking and this work for is key for organizing keep doing my work on 30 also that research and the seating radicality of their scholarship reproduced in real was annoying not to review the YC and all the choice reading is in real one and all the pressure discipline they agree on the scholarship read under the study from the position of this authority we have to refuse coming up with new ideas and different ways of reading one thing to struggles of others beyond the way they are in text.
So I got this kind of read. Oh, sure. I had time on that. It's not you did. Okay. It's fine. I'm arguing at different ways of reading. That seems fine. Okay. Give me your.
Alright, first question, the garbage cart has had lack of concrete demand in the state. Like maybe I'm dumb, but this seems like quintessential link of emission. Why is this the reason the app is bad? Because
There's a few things. First, the first card that we read, the web evidence, says that you're forwarding of the undercommons is something that forecloses
No, I'm not
those
asking about the
politics.
undercommons links, I'm asking.
Well, so it implicates that, like it sets up for that to be offense. Then the second is that if you do try to make energy-based link turns about how the app creates energy to get to the revolution, or there are other affective things that break down capitalism, this is a deficit to that.
So, okay, sure. I suppose the Azule card, you read like a sentence from one case. It says that we cannot just read or think about other people in debate, but instead we need a mechanism of engaging with them. I'm curious how like fiat and your model of debate makes that possible. Seems like this is maybe the interest for you.
Well, model of debate, I'm confused. We've only said that we do not have to negate on topical apps.
You didn't say, yeah, that's a model of debate. But regardless, my question stands, like, why does this mean that debating the way that you think that affirmative debate is good?
I'm confused why it would implicate why topical debates are good. Like, we only think that it's fair.
Well, I think, okay, I guess actually to clarify this question, we'll move on to the billiard card, which talks about, trans studies requiring a really specific set of political commitments, especially, quote, interlocutors who lack lived experience. And so I'm curious what commitments are involved in framework. What are the concrete political commitments as it relates to trans people that you think framework involves?
I don't think that the reading of topicality in one debate itself is a commitment. If you're talking about how
you said we gotta have commitments to trans scholarship, and I'm just curious what your commitments are.
Well, when you say commitment to trans scholarship, Billard says that focusing on materially decreasing the conditions of.
So I'm asking you, how, what is the process by which framework and deliberating over framework does something
You
material
would
for
say
trans
that a
people?
topic with a predictable stasis is the best way to maximize our ability to do those tactics.
Okay.
Unpredictable topic would create false positives, and we're unable to truth test the value of the
That's
affirmative or any other strategy.
How does about resolve fairness?
The fairness violation occurs when we lose the debate to an unpredictable AF. Voting neg would solve that by preventing that things.
Sure. The Lee evidence says when people think things are fair, they feel better. Is there anything else that you think this card says that I'm missing?
Sorry. I mean, it's that, but on a much larger scale.
Okay.
It ties into neurological processes.
Sure. So then I guess my question is, like, why is procedural fairness key for that? Because I understand you'll make other arguments why procedural fairness is different than structural fairness, but it seems like this is really generic to just feeling like the things are set up fairly for you. And I'm curious how that reconciles with like uniqueness questions about structural fairness.
Procedural fairness is the only impact that is causally resolved by the ballot and all three of you voting negative, so.
Okay, so we agree that you can't solve the psychological violence part of this argument
I
because
mean,
you can't
if
solve.
we felt procedural, if we felt unfair because of a procedural loss, that would obviously trigger the impact.
Okay. Can you take 1 second of prep? Cool. 13 seconds, which is 9:47.
Yeah, okay. Order. Wait a second. Hold on. Correct. Uh, 8 seconds. Okay.
9:39.
The 2AC is the case. Framework. The counter plan. The cap K. Scalar specification. There's no doubt. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah.
Sorry, 1 more second. Yeah, 2 seconds. All right, third time taking prep. 37. This is a consistent problem.
Panel?
The transformation of a dignified with response to transmit offsets between reactionary narratives that trans people are diluted versus liberal counter narratives that trans people are suffering because both maintain that trans people are a best to clean up so we can be safe for ourselves. This atmosphere of cleanup has the impact of trans antagonism. It should be filtered through incommunicability even when you're trans way to share it because language fails to communicate the structural nature of trans beyond gender. Be this through death before the transition impact will want to be put on pause without the possibility of quantifying transphobia since that can only exacerbate our vote app to refract the trans fate. There's no time left to find an argument persuasive enough so render the terms of the trans fate irrelevant to the subtle people recognition of trans life. That's things like white members that get shots in the thighs with Soviet students for Jesus name marches, far houses that aim all the way transist below. The Raiders are going to be his existence, even if it's not knowing which is the whole way transist will do the only way to build the way of living out of no way. The presumption arguments answered by the role of the ballot is to take the leap of faith. It's the only way to resolve the communicative abandonment impact by recognizing that your role to preserve the way that trans students take and retool communicative norms. So assert yourself over our experience of gender because there's no one way that people communicate. So practicing which extend capacity rather than siding with procedural speech is the only way to actualize the passionate utterance that desire spaces like debate when it's separate from the conversation on gender, so you don't get to opt out prior to transphobia. The second presumption word, the app solves. One, writing on the wall, arguments to do connections are material strategy. When you see lines, shots, and thighs became material, imperative, existential. Shows that the people I've met help me get on DIY, HRT, and access transition, which is the reason that our arguments are important. Second, terms of rejoinder opting out of the trans debate is good because how politics moves towards advocacy now is bad and reduces violence against trans people, which is impacted by the case of review as an impact targeted framework. The factualization argument wrong about trans connections through things like DIY HRT is good, but this is a self-report. If the only way you can respond is through trans antagonism, that means that you should lose until you can figure it out. The state good. I think Billard is just going to end up being state good, so I'll answer that here. One, did we relate this is an offense because they haven't made a trade-off argument. Our offense is informative and rhetorical because it's a question of how we engage rather than what we engage. Second, false universality dissent, producing trans evidence is necessary each moment to glue back to produces all the group organizing this falling on gender, race-wise body sets, these differential overexertion. If Michigan wants to vote, will
alone make to no reason other than to their performance can solve this. Their uniqueness is offensive matter of the state could be given this question. And what happens when the government doesn't show up? You should think about the Star House where they lived in a train room that got towed in. We did the house on East 2nd that had no power, no boiler, only we solved the level of abandonment, which is why our political commitments solve their offense, but theirs don't solve. They say, especially scholarship by interlocutors who lack lived experience or those invested in the politicization need to meet this political bar of clear commitments. They didn't say trans or framework, which is a clear reason that sort of they have not met the threshold they set out for their own politics, and this links to them, the Bill of Bono evidence. The school optimism card loses this debate. 1-0 framework. They've defended sort of fiat and instrumental vision of rejoinder. Their ev says that school optimism and imagining the future is bad, which is offense against all of the debates that they're going to cite. Second, only the absolute system impact means clash and sort of fairness are ineffective now, but are attending this spatial debates ethical relationship for a transition that enable meaningful engagement. That's not cruel optimism. DIY HRT example. None above. Now the part about reading, the is not a way of reading. It's cut way too early. The salty things are done above. How the connection between theory, method, and performance are necessary. They're not things that exist in the vacuum of each other, but they're all mutually reinforcing and happening at the same time, which is literally what the 1AC does, where impact learning your refusal. You don't get to say no to listening to trans women. This is like don't say yay. Those that make trans conversations off the charts because there might be something bad about them. Also trans topicality and everything else because it's a foreign contradiction. We talk about acts that talk about trans women as impacts, not debaters, reject the team for ethical fluidity, and sort of proves all our offense on all the other flows framework. Counter and are both apt to take the leap of faith. Refusing to vote negative for procedural violations is good. Two issues frame this. One, victim blaming the trans debate is reconstituting when the twin goes out. Trans antagonists are trying to run the model and trans people that are wrong, not bad actors that are violent now. Second, actualization when he proves that there's no neutral floor. Debates good examples like transphobic travel protocols or how to score speech. So even if everyone read a plan, it wouldn't actualize fairness or the physiological benefits they cited because the procedures can account for the ways that our utterances are shaped by extra linguistic norms and structures. That's when I see very offense, one surrogacy is that, that's true. Their imitation of framework pedals and hammers through sympathetic concern in every moment of this how you participate should be read as a flattening of transition and inherent fluency. That's the after-need-this. This activity looks different for different people, and rather than offering protection via the TPAs which I make clash fairness, the stakes of transit hammers requires a departure from this is how we ought all debate. The impact is dry to when you see sense examples like Aaron Still, moments of accidental disclosure title. Well, I really think that's dangerous for you. You might lose all these physiological benefits when it comes to violence by giving up that solicits strategic betrayals under the back end of guys in negotiation or getting an opinion or doing what's best for your health. Second, communicative labor to have all debates or invitations they provided you to procedure protection marketplace by ideas that outweighs competition limits and fairness of all attaches forth to negation, assuming the best arguments rise in the winners of the modern day proposition truth. This word translates with communicative labor transits must be proved by proximity to valid arguments, turning every debate into prerequisite justification of behavior, instrumentalizes transit, transmittal with valid as they internalize procedural norms of reputation and competition. The impact is exhaustion. People are taking these participants in the marketplace only through constant labor to prove everyone to prove one's worth through the turn of truth making. Those that are relevant or even maximization are welcome, which makes a an attractive energy policy for students when he sees open invitation to a change, changes valuation by placing competition as second debate transits that shapes how relationality operates. That's case. Limits irrelevant policy teams read squirrely bullshit after break new have you ever seen? NDT limits means policy teams constantly violate the limits viewed with love again which transfers are pathologized. The fairness argument. One, disqualifications just happening fairness but us it's saying logic to push trans women and women's sports trans women only exists when it's winning in unfair advantages as the anti-trans logic trans women are always invalidated as cheaters and ruining everyone else's chances turns our offense procedures enact unfairness because trans women first have to prove we're not liars before we can make arguments. Second, no impact fairness can't provide a reason to play the game. There's no reason to be here to disregard the Michigan is about their win-loss ratio. Third, regress. Speed, coaching, side by the block makes it inevitable. The Lou evidence about physiological benefits or impact turning that you are not my doctor. You don't get to tell me what's good or bad for my health. Their evidence says post-species survival, which is a danger to reproduction, is how trans people are pathologized. Is not saving the kids. It's also about neural processes, which is how trans is always diagnosed as thinking wrong. And you need to change your attitude so that everyone can have the physiological benefits to me, which is the reason that they've been transgender. They cannot kick this offense because your rhetoric is violent. The subjectivity arguments. The app does not need to win, reshape subjectivity. The app is good for trans people, and their rhetoric is bad. The ballot can reject it by disconnecting transphobic outcomes from a reward of the ballot. The idea that if we don't let them negate them, they become reactionary dogmatic is our offense about how they always need us, but we don't need them. The counter plan cannot solve the affirmative. It does not have the internal to debate. The case is an impact turnout because it always externalizes from the conditions of where trans people actually are, which is our debate about debate good offense. Kicking positions is a voting issue because it allows equity and them to shift and not be held accountable. No or yes parts of that debate. Anything else to plan that obviously for debating. This is how they taught class trans women. They had on the case when I said the don't say gay stuff. The captain.
You should understand this is a debate about debate one, material waste or design, return to material politics, waste and transits, as outside relevance because dysphoria can't be pointed to, material something felt at the level of the body must be conceptualized through debate, as shots in the lies of material imperatives, second performance, enacted a method throughout theory performance, moving outside debate, race conditions by which we translate out debate and forms capital labor attention by blaming us for not doing enough. Permutation do both two claims. Yes, perms and debate, anything else is planned done above. One, devotion, politics, or devotion, else trans people are put on the front line. Think about how supposed allies are like, you can't be transphobic to me, I'm actually a biological woman, I'm not trans, that rewrite violence towards us, as a paid. You abandoned comrades. Second, faith, act examples of theology, proof, reenact, organizing, that's the Starhouse or DIY HRT stuff. I did on case insert materialism links because the app is material. The alt fails when inviting, there's no vision for how they unite communists, other than just asserting that they are right. Second, in debate, that all of the case impacts. Scalar spec. One, we meet. The one he was about debate. Our policy claims are about debate. Cross-sex checks. Their cross-sex that Rose says theology is one. The theory for how we understand our commitments here, that's the choice or chance. Step in the one he sees, which means the F scale is debate. Second, it points to a set of politics. That's how debate intersects with transits. It's not the one he sees the star house, but knowing trans history and committing to it results in things like shots. And the thesis imperative, which results in how I got on HRT, which is our commitment and our scale is the frame about debate. Second, your interpretation and specification arguments are bad. A, subpoint blocking, decide asking judgment to specify themselves, and what they do creates a blocking politics that always checks our bodies and how we count space. This is the one he did. But like I don't know how to explain this to you because we're constantly checked but never listened to. Prove my cross-sex when they asked about one he lines. We did not say B subpoint for the violation, no interpretation. What is the specification? Just that we have to do means there's always violation we can never meet, which means they crowd out substance to go for theory and can never solve their offense turns. Their argument about debate to be generative. Third, rhetoric this had a subpoint framing the act as being burdened, reproduces labor attraction from transmission that always have to prove ourselves. B subpoint their claim that the app collapses into self-righteousness is how trans politics are pathologized as, oh, you're just sad and trans and ask people to vote for you, but never have a material commitment behind it, or they link because they have not specified how they engage the scale of this debate. 5, don't error neg. Crossing temperature is clear. The act is about debate. We specified one C context. This is how our words are constantly taken and misinterpreted by such people, which is ambiguity and bad. They can't apply this to framework because we want to see like actually was clear about debate. We did not say shit about the topic. We said this is how we relate to this space.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
First case, what was the role of
To have faith.
what does that mean?
Take a leap.
Take a leap. Yeah. Sorry. What that means, it's the only way to resolve communicative abandonment impact. What that means for the judges is that we ought to recognize that there's no way out of the conversation of gender. No one is separate from gender. And so prioritizing transphobia is paramount, or else trans people are left behind by the procedures as, oh, that's something for trans people to worry about, rather than something we all need to think about because none of us are outside of gender.
Well, actually, especially you need to think.
Why is it mutually exclusive to agree that we should take a leap of faith and also that the neg should not have to rejoin on top collapse?
I think like the question answers itself. The idea that you get to opt out is bad.
Well, it's
Our argument is
opting out.
no, I'm answering the question.
Okay.
People get to opt out now because they think of themselves as separate from the conversation on gender. It's like, we shouldn't be burdened with responding to you. That's the op-ed about how you don't listen. You ask about lines that were not in the one you see, and are like, I don't really want to have this debate at all. It shouldn't have happened.
Well, when did we say that?
You said that we should not be burdened with your gender. We should not have to talk to you. That is the first line out of the one and C. So I don't know how you get to go for no link when you said we don't want to debate you.
Okay. The CAPK, yes, terms. What was the reason?
Anything else obviates link debating and avoids talking to trans women. We cross-apply the case arguments about how people constantly opt out of the conversation.
Okay. Why is opting out of the conversation the same as you should not get to permute things that are mutually exclusive?
Because arguments that you go for should talk about the affirmative and talk to trans women.
So if an alternative was like truly mutually exclusive, would you still?
Then you would have done link debating and you wouldn't have
Well,
gone for
but the
the
second part,
method.
the like obviating talking to trans women, like
Well, so if you
But
want a
we-
link, then
yeah.
the
Then you can like
alternative
go
is-
over your arguments, but like we've said that automatically refusing to evaluate the perm is bad.
Our interpretation is you need a link to debate the app,
Yeah.
which seems reasonable.
Okay. Infighting. What is the reason?
Because you're constantly trying to unify communists and assert that your vision is correct. You don't have a vision, trying to convince everybody, which is how you're just like, oh, these leftists are bad, everybody should join my party. Oh, those leftists are bad, you should join my party.
The one seat affirmed the normative statement that trans Marxism is valuable and a better politic than the app. Why does that still lead to infighting?
So our argument is about the comparison between left-wing politics. Oh, we're better, you need to stop doing your shit and come to my side, is the sort of way that unification results in infighting and slap, because you're always blaming other leftists and other trans people that are like trying to do the shit they need to do to get through debates, to survive, to face trans antagonism in the first place. And you're like, that shit's not important, our politics are better.
So how should we negate the F if not by saying that you've done your
Wrong question. Wrong question. The 2AC has reframed this debate. It is no longer what could you have done, because it's about what did you do. You started the 1NC with we should not have to talk to you.
Right. The two things that I'm gonna send you. They will need to be short. Make it clear. Actually, it's just this thing. Can you send that out? Nice. So because it's 100% this, right? Yeah, like 100%. Yeah, okay, we'll see, but, yeah, great. And then, do you want, okay. Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think it would, yeah, actually. But I can have a good idea, I was thinking about it. That. Actually, low-key, I think we should incorporate a little bit of this language into this.
What was the name of the second framework argument on the cap game? It was material liberation, and the second one was?
The second one
Like, we didn't do that.
was, performativity design.
You want to know the content?
No, I understand, but I just.
$6.18. No cards, it's T.
Just keep.
Yeah.
Great.
So, just T. Kansas good.
Yes.
Debate begins with a negative response. It is unlike other outlets for expression, since students are burdened with the necessity of refutation within competitive constraints. All other venues or relationships already offer the chance to agree and collaborate. Only debate forces the stark terms of disagree or lose. Kansas has already acknowledged and accepted the intrinsic value of the negative's role. They chose to introduce their pedagogy in a tournament format that requires rejoinder, respect the timer, and expect us to respond with a 1 and C. A loss of fairness is significant and demands a remedy because it undermines the very foundation of what makes debate a competition in the first place. That outweighs 1, mutual interest. Fairness is an axiomatic shared value for both us and Kansas, so it must come first. They'll point out dropped arguments, post-round if they lose, and they would never let me give a 3-and-R or 10-minute 2-and-R, even if it actualized their strategy better, regardless of the different reasons why people join debate. The bottom line is when we get here, our preparation and strategies are made with a win in mind. 2, presumption dropped. Decking competitive equity indicates the veracity of every affirmative claim. The judge cannot arbitrate the relative strength of the case without first determining whether the negative should have been prepared to debate it. This argument was dropped and ends the debate right now, explicit in the 1 and C. All of you take out truth over truth from your paradigms. If you don't vote negative right now, because those in the 1 and C only need to win 1% risk of fairness, because it zeroes all of their offense, even if you think it's silly. And those explicit in the 1 and C. 3, the ballot. You can vote neg to agree with the entire 1 and C, but grant us the win. To create a procedural remedy for a limited chance of victory, their impacts are categorically less important because they are not resolved by the ballot. 4, it's a requisite fairness is the logical condition to the entire activity. It cannot be disambiguated from any of their arguments, including fairness bad, because those themselves require fair evaluation. 5, turns to offense. Fair debates improve the quality of negative discussions over their method. Unfair topics worsen structural balance and green light dogmatic responses that lack nuance and scholarly merit. 6, procedure first. Evaluate T prior to the case, since we've indicted the debate happening in the first place. 2EC 1, vote after a leap of faith as a counter term is wrong. This round frames it that has no stable mechanism and fails to control F test for climate change. It has a vague advocacy for faith and a performance that, while valuable, is impossible to negate. Forcing negation of this app is inherently bad, forces us to say that in an aggressively transphobic environment in Trump presidency that trans people should make themselves noble in the face of right-wing fascists or abandon faith. Any counter method is impossible absent a stable advocacy or relation to the topic. So we have to defend an incredibly violent subject position, which even if I lose all of T, vote negative on this alone, can't solve. 1, limits. It opens the floodgates to 300 million non-governmental activist movements or social locations to foreign faith in anything or nothing at all, which destroys the negative's ability to rejoin the app. 2, ground critiques of the topic, dishabs and counterline competition all rely on federal implementation of climate policy. 3, predictability. It is not grounded in resolutional wording, which makes it de facto impossible to prepare for. Extend our interpret really quickly. The negative, you only rejoin apps to defend action by the federal government. The price of trade carbon, no victim blaming to decide. 1, no link. We never victim blamed them for a hypothetical limit exclusion, but said that they were unfair in this debate. 2, false analogy. The ballot does not blame them for reading a topical app and label them in any particular way. It says that we should not have to rejoin the 1 C. 3, it's inevitable. Saying that we cast them in some non-positive light because of something they did is definitionally inevitable in any model of debate. The Cap K would victim blame them for not being material enough, even though capitalism is incredibly transphobic, and any other counter method would victim blame them for including something that we don't think is necessary or we did better. We are not calling them cheaters or saying they cut and run for the product that'll be done below. No actualization decide. This is our argument. We know the ballot cannot add to hypothetical model of debate or make everyone read a plan, but you can vote negative to remedy a fairness violation here and now in this debate. No strong C decide. 1, no link. T is a neutral mechanism to ensure a negative role. It is the tool to systematically exclude trans thought or argumentation. There's no difference between us reading T in this round and reading TMBI against Georgetown. I'm sorry, BK. In both cases, T is the discussion between two teams about what the topic means. Similarly, T does not deny the importance of trans thought or argumentation. Our model would also exclude personhood, nukes, and every path that we have read on previous topics like the high school topic. Voting negative does not say that those issues or trans thought are unimportant. It merely says that there should be some balance for discussion to preserve a role for the negative. 2, rejoin or non-incorporation. They can read whatever they want. T just says we don't have to rejoin it, and they shouldn't get the ballot. 3, false analogy. Voting negative does not say that there's a right way to talk about transness. It simply says that Kansas lost the game. When soccer players go offside, they don't get beaten up or thrown out of the league or get called a cheater. They just don't earn a goal. 4, selectivity inevitable. T is substance and no different from any other negative argument. It disputes whether the app should win for presenting the 1 C in debate. T is also less adversarial because it doesn't force us to disavow their commitment. 5 is they link their interpretation excludes the thought of trans policy debaters who wish to read a plan. No communicative labor decide. 1, no link. They assume topicality. Since competition is exclusive, not essential. We don't deny the importance of friends or intercommunal relationality or conversations in the hallways. For this reason, nobody will drop out of Heathlands to hang out while they would spread, strategically highlight cards, shotgun like 5 framework decides did line by line and try to sound good in the debate to win the ballot and just open source their files to have better debates. 2, not apologizing. Competition is a unifying force that serves as a point of commonality. The moments in stories we share arise from a competitive
competitive setting, they don't motivate callousness, but respect for and appreciation for the process of the game. 3, they voluntarily chose to partake instead of hosting a discussion. Respect the timer, would not let me give a 25-minute to an hour, and conform to every other norm. Those innately tie Kansas up into debates, competitive metrics, and prove they have a win in mind. 4, ballot pick. If they truly have no competitive investment and only care about intracommunal rationality, vote Ned to agree with them, but unfairly give us the win because we want to win and we're invested in debates competitive schema. 5, no link. Team competition does not deem transphobia as unprofitable. It is a provisional judgment on the quality of debating, not a referendum on character, interpreting it as the latter makes you the jury and executioner, causing psychological damage, and turning the case. Limits explosion is not inevitable. Drops our counter-trip is only a carbon tax and cabin trade by the U.S. federal government. There's only a couple acts that apply. Generic still apply. We get states process. Counterbalance dissects and critiques of climate politics. It is our internal link is still massive because the counter-trip is totally unlimited and unpredictable. And we have separate internal links, i.e. grounded predictability, no disqualifications. He does not claim that they cheated. It's not a referendum on their character. Rather, it's a judgment. The argument introduced in the Moisey should not have to be rejoined. It's like how losing to TMBI is the same from an ethics challenge or living allegation that was all answered above. It is so not analogous to say trans women are cheating in sports, even if when the T is analogous to cheating, the violation is not being trans or being trans scholarship or reading it on top of the left. They say no impact fairness. It was done above. You can vote negative to remedy fairness in this round, even if fairness does not actualize some extrinsic value. They say regress and loss is inevitable. It's incorrect. Speed is offset by spreading drills. Coaching is not a reason that why debate is terminally unfair. Side bias is wrong. The after a reasonable amount of cases like carbon tax, cap and trade that are sector specific. The negative gets resource-based politics and agency trade-off. This has counterbalance like states and critiques of hegemonic climate politics. The loot voting issue. Scratch the card. Debate rounds are poor form for correcting transgressions. There's an inherent incentive to frame everything in the worst possible light and omit any tolerating context or detail. A punishment for Michigan should not go as a reward for Kansas. Voting on this encourages teams to police and surveil their opponents in the hope of digging up dirt that makes carcinogen toxic. We never said that trans people are quote unhealthy. It is about the effects of fairness on us. Do not make us defend all neurology. That is a horrible burden. It is infinitely regressive. That level of simplification would make them defend all faith, which is obviously problematic. If you don't think that's what the app does, because it's obviously not. It's obviously not us saying the problematic things they implemented our card speeding. We never defended species survival and justice fairness losses are bad because they make us sad. If anything, they permitted the CAPK, which claims to solve extinction, which means it links to them equally harder. Now, debate does not shape subjectivities, and ballots solve nothing, zeroing all affirmative offense. 1, all cause of school, family, and friends, and the next 50 years will lives. 2, other rounds, a single round in one tournament, has 0 bearing on the rest of the season. 3, inconsistency. Each K-team offers a different method and interpretation in response to framework preventing fidelity to any one single method or vision. 4, attribution. Teams will chalk up losses to tactical failures or bad press, not ethical shortcomings. 5, switch side. We read conflicting arguments like market's good and market's bad. This is not unique to quote-unquote policy debate. Kansas goes to the CAPK almost every 2NR and answered it like any other position in the 2EC when they're on the opposite side. 6, recoil. Teams double down after losses, becoming better advocates of the state, fairness, or climate politics. And 7, bad faith. Teams read arguments they don't believe in, like warming good. 8, empirically. Debaters have read the CAPK before working for hedge funds and lost the past before joining the military. 9, studies. The overwhelming consensus is negative in highly informational environments bound by time limits and competition. Debaters prioritize, quote, scoring points over, quote, epistemic improvement, both in argument selection and refinement. Debaters, discussions with debaters or movements within debate or relationships within debate may shape who we are and what we become, but never competitive singular rounds. That's Nevaeus. They do need to beat this argument to win ballot solvency, as well as our arguments about competitive incentives. The Bellavino evidence is not a double turn. There's no reason that Fiat is truly optimistic. We have not said that they ought to defend Fiat. We just said that we should win because they read it on top block.
How much do you have?
Okay, sorry, subsidies kind of one. Subsidies counterplan, it's condo, we're not going for it. Kicking arguments into the voting issue, topicality is a prior question, because they read it on top of the last before we tried to kick, which applies to all other voting issues. Ethical fluidity is answered elsewhere. Anything else means we have ineffective debates because we're forced to go for worse arguments over better ones, watering down debates' potential and kicking the argument solves.
Okay, you're good? Yep. Okay, the 1EC posed some questions about what it means to engage in a fair debate. I'm unsure that the 2NC has answered them, so I'm going to ask them again. What fact can convince a reactionary that I am not deluded? What statistic can convince an ally that I am not suffering?
I'm convinced about, we've made arguments that we shouldn't have to negate a method that challenges those assumptions because it's necessarily, it puts us in that position and it doesn't align with the burden for joining us. So how do we talk about this?
Okay, so this is a separate question than those, so it's like, you don't have to negate that, but my question is, when we have fair debates, there is this frame that trans people are expected to follow that is unfair. How do you solve the unfair frame? What do I say that stops trans antagonism?
I mean, I disagree with that interpretation, or with that characterization, that trans folk have to present themselves in a certain way.
Well, so do you think that the trans debate does not exist?
I mean, sure it exists.
Okay, so it exists, and currently there's an oscillation between reactionary demonization and liberal protection. So if that structure exists, and it is unfair, what do trans people do about it that enables us to have a fair debate in the first place?
Okay, so that could be a argument about structural unfairness, which we've said is distinct from procedural unfairness, and fairness ought still be maximized. Even if we can't resolve all structural unfairness, i.e. the violence of the trans debate, we should still try to make debate as procedurally fair as possible, because fairness is a good thing that we should try to uphold.
Okay, the first answer you gave is that would force you into a bad negative position. I'm kind of confused on if the negative would respond transphobically to us. This is also your recoil argument. Why is that a reason that you win? It's like, seems like a self-report to me. You've admitted that you would have to debate the case by being transphobic.
Well, it's not necessarily that we would need to. It's also, I mean, this is more like a models of debate kind of question. Our argument is that it puts, so it's not that, we necessarily responded with a transphobic position. We obviously did it in the 1 and C, but it's much harder for the negative to engage, which increases the likelihood.
Okay, if negation is bad, I don't get why that means you win. If you would be bad to us if you negated the F, why is that a reason that you deserve the F? That says, I would be trans antagonistic if I had to respond to the F. I don't get why that is a negative.
Forcing us to have the burden of rejoinder against something that is, and like you cannot meet the burden of proof if we're not able to rejoin.
What? Okay, whatever. The next argument I sort of want to ask about, if it is the sort of Leo stuff. You said, basically my question is, why do you get to kick transphobic shit? You said.
Well, because it's not transphobic.
I didn't read defense.
I did.
Okay.
Sure, whatever. I have
Okay. We're gonna take part. Sorry. Okay, that was 55 seconds, which means that we have 55. Okay, hold on, I'm doing math. 8:42 remaining.
It's the case, scale spec, and then the cat.
Okay.
100%. So can you say that again? Case, scale spec, and then the cat. Is that not good?
Got it, yep.
I don't.
So give me 1 second.
The rule of the balance is vote for who did the better debating. Anything else is infinitely regressive because they have to win and they have to win their role for the ballot, unflinchingly taking a leap of faith because it's false positive in the calculus and in fact no, do not reject the team for ethical validity. If we make a contradiction that scraps that part and only evaluates optionality, that solves an offense, anything else counts on substantive debates, making it impossible for us to engage the strategy because we can ever effectively negate, not a contradiction. We haven't said that they must retop the laugh. We've only set a burden for what the Meg needs to do now. And though not called Joseph John, the 2 scale spec, conceding we're not going for it. No offense across applicable because the argument is about what they have to do, not about the next word. If they were violent, if anything we said was violent, objective argument, not the team. The capitalism outweighs jump that this normativity is not a product of theological actionism, but the capitalist will be found that societal singular upon which to accumulate profit. Deep back to its case, so interest of DA to the permutation outweighs Davis. This housing discrimination, self-harm, sexual assault, and criminalization. I try to life is a systemic failure, not about capitalism. When I see Buckner agrees, neoliberalism causes internalization and self-policing that reinforces this normativity that's centered. When I see Buckner here, it obviously externally the profit motive drives resource extraction beyond planetary boundaries, ensuring the painful death of 8 billion via climate change, social certification. I'm already first as a trader now. It's not a debate about debate. You should compare material strategies from voting on TV. The links are all that benefits this interpretation. Them saying that it should only be about a debate. It's itself a link. They've said that we should foreclose material starting points in favor of discussing and in favor of discussions of this community, which will leave in a few years. Trading off material organizing, no erasure DA, no link does not assume that we've read issue specific evidence about how capitalism perpetuates trans violence and affirmed the normative statement of trans Marxism, no performativity DA. We have not included, we have not said that no trans scholarship or politics is ever valuable. We said their attempt to start being here is insufficient. It's good for us to tell Kansas that their politics are insufficient. Anything else causes false positives will go out to the world thinking the Apple strategy is enough because we could never tell them that it was not, but they will get crushed by capitalist imperialism, straight turning their offenses. Also, this proves that the Apple's about KVK debates being good. They said that saying the plan does not solve is bad. Do both. Permutation rejected will be very explicit. The one to see it may vaguely agree with the sentiment that trans people should take an anti-capitalist stance will be feedback turned their way of doing so. That's on the list. Later on, more words. It's capitalist at level of 4 of the 2C performs neoliberal incorporation by extending capitalist logics like opportunity costs, enforcing the contradictory forces to coexist for the smooth operation of the political economy. No purpose of method debate. The one he gets to choose any advocacy with no ties to a resolution, which means you should force to defend the literal best option to preserve revolutionary testing. Our interpretation does not obviate talking to trans women. We have one links below. Even if you think the word is true, you should arbitrarily bracket out the app at all to maximize revolutionary testing, which also straight turns not talking to trans women. Every plea to the value of KP candidates on T is an independent reason why you should hold the line and maximize the nuance of our discussion because perms make those words. No doing both. Study points and practices are mutually exclusive. Not shaking 18, you can do both the working class and and dividing class politics, power structure, and distinct ways to think political strategy, the dual strategy, the balance of capital, or the way to our coalition, to reach a working class against, to neutralize universalism, and fighting out for a shared working economy, it's just raising with partisan power. Now, links are DA to appear one undercommon carded and dropped. Hold the line. Once Buckner explicitly endorses Bush's notion the undercommon, saying it has no time for deliberation, is, quote, not concerned with persuading those who are already convinced, and not seeming to form publics and they hope that we may deliberate ourselves in the position of freedom. We have impact turned that premise in the first place. Webster is a form of, quote, radical escapism where we retreat from the dialectical struggle that informed the foundations of the Marxist Party that alone classical autonomy rather than a sole focus on the interpersonal and explicitly rejecting institutions. We must make time for deliberation and, quote, persuade those who are already convinced that capitalism and Transphobia are bad but lack the organizational capacity and direction to effectively mobilize. To misdiagnose Buckner rejects critique based on common ground equal footing. Say we ought instead to abandon the integer of life and vector that up top beingness is not the root cause, rather a lack of organized class struggle. That's when we see Buckner inserted here. 3. Institutionality, but to the answer work within the proper channels of civil society and, quote, tearing down the structure of the state for close and capital resistance. You did the association people are just continue to culture based on capital relationship to transform that economic transition capital use we take us and restriction we do it towards the rational really translate into those essential we're not that should go to self translation choose we're not going to be material translation loss of our saying of an animal body even though much of the critique was those restriction critical procedure and ability to institutions are already here and already about to go in solidarity and institutionality shows out the geolocation of futures outside determinations for unknowability is form of defeatist resilience that sees opportunity to neoliberalism of value and not even resilience as a neoliberal members of the rest of the job and your nobility is receiving that opportunity is called the unknown answers to the identify models are turning years into there's a possibility that social economies more than one of us are raising resilience about the cost of war aliens when should be understood to believe that was you will discourse of nobility be able to realism resilience the custody and how you reach order out he has the possibility that acknowledging it for nobility solution is represented by the work of nobility there's a word to have that years and knowledge is celebration of knowledge is as well as a neoliberal governing by global regime the use of knowledge through self-care and self-government running over resilience because all class activities are so I'm not all of the responsibility for effects and employee and seemingly challenges no link is a class Buckner versus transit it's a quote unknowable signifier that refers to communicability and sort of what I see Buckner here now the alternative voting for transformation rather than focus on the interpersonal anti-capitalism must take the starting point of institutions that provide the material resources necessary for endurance and transformative shifts, creating justice through try or die. Even if you cannot solve all of the gap, you know that it breaks down the structure that perpetuates trans suffering and averts certain doom which must outweigh no devolution gain. Their offense assumes we formed an argument about joining the party. It is a total misdiagnosis. We formed an enormous statement that says that trans Marxism would be good. Hold the line. A mischaracterization. It would be worse for the movement to maintain perpetrators, so they have an incentive to crack down if needed. Their explicit endorsement of the undercommons blinks back. It's about unconditionally allowing everybody in. The opposite of the accountability mechanism. No infighting gain. Again, it's just a normative statement. If the most effective version of trans Marxism happened, it would be good. This is not scientific materialism. The old saw is focusing on providing a mouthfeel, the medical care, food, resources, tailor truth. When the material needs is a large internal link to energy, the gap there could be. And also, just because they said material things are valuable, they foreclose the ability to get any of that offense. When they explicitly said debate should only be about what happened in this debate.
We have 8:42, starting now. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, 6 minutes. Case cap framework, no cards. Can I have this stand? You playing games, Sebastian?
Yeah.
I was wondering, it looked like you were recording for a second, and I was like, no, you're probably like cookie culture. Okay,
What is it?
case cap framework. Okay. Allegra, PK, DJ, Michigan. Great. Come on, Michigan, don't drop the case overview of the framework debate. That before transition flips the script and impact how those trends is incommunicable, which is our hypothesis. There's no argument that can prove what transit tactics feels like, so we ought not try. Instead, hold this major transition refuses the call to answer the call to translate that oscillates through reactionary demonization, local protection of our trans people. That needs to be safe from ourselves. This is an impact trigger because we are waiting that the protocols of debating produce trans antagonism to calls to preserve the game on face should be rejected, but after perfect trans debate, the ass theory about the performance of case security means for trans people stay stuck through faith, losing underground Marxist DOH or teamed by trans color or star house, making each other's needs with the power without leaving the writing on the wall means you should tap into those histories and endorse underground faith as methodology to navigate trends and tactics and make that impossible through refusal to engage, which is the don't say. Campbell's argument from the 2EC. Now, the role of valid state leap of faith, only that solves our communicative abandonment impact, which is dropped by the block. No one is separate from gender, so no one is separate from trans, is restrict neutrality possible. Instead, take non-neutrality, weaponizes through refraction to distort what counts as the better debating. It's not arbitrary, it is instruction that says prioritizing trans is a necessary matter of fraction, a way to distort the entire communication, the whole face for the passionate utterance rather than seeking to instrumentalize trans. Cap. Debate about debate or leap of faith argument, the one see enacted a method, the one see purely deliberates one. The gap between those is a solvable deficit. The all can't argue with, and that benefits the permutation, which is the conformity stuff. This means the two can go for a U-right framework and allow way their offense. It's not only about debate, but you cannot isolate the performance of material strategies, which I said in what I see cross two pieces of offense. One, material erasure is that mishandled. Some trans attacks happen materially, but it's also a discourse destruction that cannot be seen or observed or communicated, which is the case. Thesis also cannot theorize or resolve that balance, which means that accounts of the trans as a linguistic structure is key. It's a reason why the alternative can solve it. It also means absence of accounting and connecting in here to out there, voting negative doesn't solve anything. This frames out the overview impact of those arguments because they might solve some trans impacts, but certainly not the trans big impact. They entered Marxism as transphobic. Not that you're missing something, but they rhetorically contradict this argument. A second later, when they read the card, it's like we have abandoned identity politics altogether, or the left will collapse. Second, devotion gain no explanation of how people remain committed to the question of trans communism, absent the theoretical frame of things to motivate that politics. That's the internal to all of their offensive means. Otherwise, trans would put on the front line to no one will step up to the plate. This creates a kind of fiat double mind argument because they think if they're just a normative statement that I don't know why the link makes the mutually exclusive, but if they require generating energy to get to the alternative, then you would vote affirmative because only the affirmative could do that. Yes, we get permutations without them. The negative physical link, which causes a waste of PR, that makes impact, which solves no one's offensive base. Engaging trans attacks is impossible. No links means they can just PR nuclear war. That competes. You can't have a nuanced discussion with if you don't disagree with the Africans there. You debate good offense. Purdue both solves their offense. Explains that roughly above incorporation argument begs the question of the link that they have identity politics in the 2C is really rough for them. It proves they're not trans Marxism, but anti-identity politics class reductionism. The permutation solves every link. We cannot explicitly reject institutions. We have a mechanism for engaging without relying on them solely, which was the case page on state good. We should not abandon critique, which is their Buckner highlighting. We should do critique on the level of theory, method, and performance. They just mischaracterized what I see quote. The undercommons link is architectural. We have to find a rhetorical undercommon. We haven't said no state ever, and they've dropped that only institutions is insufficient for translate because sometimes the state or the party doesn't show up. The jury gaining evidence misses the link. We do not reject the state. The link about proper channels is the framing issue that says that sometimes the state is not enough, which we explain pretty conclusively on the 2EC case page. Unknowability is a descriptive, not a prescriptive claim. We've not said that we should not understand trans but instead trying to collapse it to a single descriptive claim is bad. We have not said that, interpretability is a good frame for evaluating politics, but instead that it's just a true claim about transatlantism. And they've just dropped that this truth claim is accurate. In fighting this at is as 100, the unification of left movements by asserting better politics results to show this in the cosmopolitan of land game instead of organizing, and shows their accusation straight up with trust means we've impacted into every link framework. Vote after the leap of faith is not a countermodel to a roll about claim. Now, one, victim blaming is that. View this as a framing issue for how you compare AF to neg offense. Every time the 2C falls back on what if other people write your AF, or what if topicality existed overnight is a reconstitution of the trans debate. I think the 2C is a lot more all in on only this debate, so we will explain kind of the context of that below, but it's also impact terms their models good arguments because we want that universalizing your model would be bad. Second, actualization. This was entered badly. The procedures are unfair. Even if they solved out their model, it wouldn't solve their offense for us because it wouldn't make a difference for your debates against Northwestern or Dartmouth, which solves their offense, but it wouldn't make our ability to access your fairness and clash offense because they could see Harry's argument that we don't enter from a neutral floor and our utterances are shaped by context, which means you can't assume a universal access to the debates that they want. They entered no models, which wasn't our arguments. We're not going to defend our interpretation broadly because what after topical, but in this debate, what negating looks like is disagreeing with the aspect that the performance negating is half good. You don't debate our experience and say the performance is bad, things bad, or theorization, trances is bad, etc. BK, your debaters went for a red of a tie K, DJ, your debaters went for a word pick, Sebastian's debaters went for pass. Iowa has had multiple and interesting in-depth case for methods, even if not perfect negative ground. You certainly prove that it's possible to negate the act without being transphobic. The surrogacy to that is an impact term that we can include you too, so T isn't exclusion. It's not the link turn, it's the link, the attempt to reshape how the WDC participates, even and especially when it's just to help us out with what the WDC 2 calls compassion mongering that solicits empathy to cover up strategic betrayals that discipline transists and the concepts, rails, of argument, and the patterns of the reading framework. It debates the counter radicals and the dry stitches on radicals because we're going to hurt our own feelings by being unfair. This is a pretty fleshed out of fairness in the 2EC. It's not a random idea, but it is tied to the invocation of fairness, which is why their invocation of the psychology argument matters. If it is literally just about the effects of fairness on them, then vote out because our offense outweighs Cyrus' frowning face. Then that rhetoric becomes saving trans women from themselves, which is how transition gets moralized, and frames the responsibility to filter out those who do and don't which is going to teach you evidence, also recreates differential labor extraction, as we have to tell you how to engage us, but you know reciprocal obligation, which is the ones that even listening to the app process, what the Luna said, in the 2EC means the trans debate is unwinnable, so refining our arguments, becoming better speakers, etc. can never solve our offense, so they don't get a negotiation, negation turns offense. I agree, topicality, we made arguments while your rhetorical frame is bad for these people in a particular social relation, which is the trans stuff I explained about. The soccer example is you're not going for a fairness. Our trip does not exclude trans policy debaters because we didn't read a counter trip, and all the arguments for why competition wasn't bad is certainly not responsive. No ballot pick or we did lose, that turns it. You should be rewarded with a ballot for performance. It was bad. And negation is good, demonstrates the value of you responding. No, TV or switch type is damning because it means you should presume there's no need for trans people to get to their ballot. Finally, fairness. They've dropped internal link defense. Predictably isn't resolutional. So chaos are predictable because they're part of how this community operates. The ballot does not only solve their offense and the remedy for unfair behaviors ballot, so you should be the remedy for trans antagonism that was explained in the 2EC. And finally, there's no paradox because adjudicated fairness and value is not until procedural fairness comes first. Everyone relies on fairness, but it doesn't mean that it's an important thing, and certainly not when we have a pretty conceded impact claim that outweighs.
I think you gotta say it.
T, the cap, K, the case. Say it again.
T, cap K, and the case.
It's an instantaneous 3-0 for the negative for Michigan. They have the 1 year and Louisiana have dropped truth testing, hold the line, no new answers, anything else would be egregiously interventionist, and I do not get a 3-0. The circuit was flagged in the 1C, it was extended in the 2C, and they have not said anything about it. You cannot determine the truth of any affirmative claim absent a prepared negative to adequately test them. The 1EC, 2AR, 1AR, and forthcoming 2AR are simply false positives produced through a lack of engagement. The 2NC also gives explicit judge instruction. We only need 1% risk of internal link failure so that our internal link is slightly larger than theirs, which means it is auto-negative valid. Regardless, fairness outweighs 1 shared interest. Victory is both a shared desire of both us and Kansas, which means that they have implicitly agreed to the mutual contract of procedural fairness. They've dropped every single example. They point out technical drops in flash analytics, respect the timer. They've read top quality in previous debates like rock for semi-single. Post-round after you have negative, rejecting fairness classes impact calculus, because you would have to conduct a fair assessment of their arguments. That proves the fair procedure is a precursor to evaluating the rest of the flow, not a fair structure, and it sequentially outweighs any impact turn. The paradox proves more than just fairness matters. It comes prior to everything that doesn't demand the explicit judge intervention, i.e. giving up a fair procedure. And the fact you haven't already ended the round proves fairness is the only thing that matters. Fairness is the only thing that matters. Second, procedure first. I'm explicitly not answering the case because top tally says we're joining it is impossible. 3, the ballot. The only thing it does is create a winner-loss on Tybrim, and fairness is the only impact dependent on that result. Their offense is definitionally less important because it's not resolved by the ballot because they dropped every answer to subject formation, which is also corresponded as ballot defense. You can vote negative to agree with the 1EC while acknowledging that should not be suited to a ballot. Then a competitive game. 1AR1, victim blaming decide 0 risk. 1, inevitable drop. Debate requires response, which necessarily requires casting Kansas in some non-positive light. That means their definition of victim blaming is definitionally inevitable under any model or vision of what debate ought to look like. They dropped our explicit examples. So the cap would victim blame them for not being material enough, even though capitalism is transphobic. They've conceded root cause. I'm not going for the cap but it proves that victim blaming is somewhat inevitable under their model, and any counter method would victim blame them for performing worse or in the wrong way. 2, false analogy. Also dropped. The ballot does not blame Kansas for reading it on top of the left and label them in any particular way. It just simply says that we should not have to rejoin the 1AC, no, the actualization decide is totally unresponsive. Our argument is not about a model debate. It's not about what would happen in the debate with Northwestern, but what happened in this debate, i.e. it was impossible and unfair to engage with the 1AC. Neutral axis is incorrect. Our impact is about procedural, not structural fairness, which only can solve yes, neutral axis. It's proven by a relatively equal win percentage, and derivation worsens structural disparities because we'll have to prep for any F from any section of the library, and there's no resolutional basis for governing what the affirmative can actually do. They say that negation is possible. They dropped every term like limits, predictability, and grounds. Their vision of the debate totally shatters it. All of their examples were shallow. They just launched and listed things that people have gone for case studies. I'm pretty sure Kansas won all of these debates, and even if possible, these require way more research and impossible to engage. Really, you think a word pick is the best way for the negative to engage? It's obviously horrible. Now, surrogacy this has zero risk. Our answers do clearly apply. The drop that there's no difference between reading T and this debate or going for T or not going for T in policy debates. It proves it is not selective incorporation or however the one year respondent are going for TMBI against Georgetown or not going for TMBI against Kansas. It's not a referendum on them as people or selective inclusion. It is just a tool in a competitive game that casts a provisional judgment on whether or not the 1AC was able to be responded to. They've also dropped the T is solely a question on the content of what was read, not the identity of the debaters. So it's not a selective incorporation of trans thought or quote unquote compassion or disciplining transness. It is really signals who won or lost a competitive game. Now, finally, the Lou evidence. Don't reject the team. One, no link. It is cut and dry. We quite literally said losing makes us sad and use a study to back up the negative effects of unfairness. In competitive spaces, that is totally antithetical to saying trans people are deluded or unhealthy. They dropped it defending all of neurology because we endorsed the vague theme of neuroscience would hold them culpable for defending Christianity, which is transphobic. It is totally out of context and it equally applies to them. Second is the job you should reject the card because debate rounds are bad forms for correcting transgressions. There's a competitive incentive to frame everything in the worst possible light, like what they did, and debates have time constraints that prevent us from genuinely engaging and talking about what happened in this debate. Now, finally, the internal link to TV and switch side is relevant. It's a question of what they did in this debate. It's not a question of what they ought to have done, but rather voting negative is the only impact the ballot can solve. Predictability is resolutional. They've conceded it's created by definitions of the most commonly recognized interpretation of MBI adopting USFP. The only reason the community needs to describe the second text of the resolution is, i.e., the topic meeting, which is the only usually understood reading of the resolution. Even if there's some interlink in predictability, it is totally irrelevant because we have other interlinks in the form of limits and ground. K concede the permutation, not going for it is a test of competition. Anything else is a reason to reject the argument. Anything else is a reason to reject the argument on team. And topicality outweighs because they read an unpredictable act before we did something bad. So what is the prior question? No link can be offense against topicality because they haven't explained how the in-round reading of the 1AC results in deconstructing an entire system. And so ballot proximity can only be negative. Case. The role of the ballot is to adjudicate who did the better debating, nothing more. Three net benefits. One, fairness, explained above. Anything else is unpredictable because it has no resolutional basis. Two, anything else is infinitely regressive and relies on our model because they have to technically win their role of the ballot in order for you to use it. Three, drop that unflinchingly taking the leap of faith corrects false positives and the lows in impact term. Just because the 1 yard didn't explicitly extend defense to the case, that is not meaning to try by act. One, T is a procedural question that determines whether or not they get to weigh the offense and is completely isolated from substance. Two, incommunicability. We've impact turned it as a frame, and so they should not get to weigh it against T. It is form of diffuse resistance that resonates with dominant neoliberal perspectives about how trans people should operate and how violence is done onto them. One Ramavelli says that adhering to the ontology of unknowability, quote, reshapes subjectivity to see the political in favor of slowly navigating ways to survive. In the face of capitalist violence, creating complacency, which is, quote, instrumental to the maintenance of capital. They've dropped this turns the case. It props us citizens of capital, which makes housing discrimination, self-harm, sexual assault, and criminalization of trans life a systemic feature, not a bug of capitalism, which also directly interacts with their often about transphobia, audit, debate, and disclosure of experience and conditions under which interpersonal violence occurs. The 1 yard tried to say no link, they're wrong. It's not just a normative statement. When I see Buckner explicitly endorses trans as a quote unknowable signifier and instead affirms we should depart from the status quo and from incommunicability, independently of them saying that's just an automatic truth, you should embrace it, is the link.
Wait, how much are 6. Okay. Stand. The case and
than for. Perfect. Michigan. The trans debates an impact on how they conceptualize debate and deliberation now as an impact on that their performances debates are always already unfair because the oscillation between reaction and demonization versus liberal protection recuperates trans people to be saved from ourselves and always make advocacy an unsafe ground. When see links to this is the tweezy. And when you're arguing on don't say gay, the first line out of their mouths is we should not have to respond to this whole how they always opt out of the conversation is bad in this unique moment of how there's a push by the Trump administration and reactionary demonization now that always says trans is secrets to talk about so you should not consider it. Remember this in the context of truancy and to our impact capitalists. They do not have a right to evaluate fairness versus transit capitalism. Just that you cannot make the case. This is a link to all of our offense, which means you cannot put negative on truth testing because that is what we have impact turns. There's always some prior question before you conduct a trans women. You should listen to what we have said. Truancy Project zeroes their offensive well. Video the procedures is just not at all an answer to the structure of transit capitalism. Over determine the safety of fairness of advocacy because who's able to speak. And when it's filtered through what is the impact of transit capitalism, here's an easy example of how that works. And procedures now, think about how Nancy based a few weeks ago got up and focused and started trending. There was no procedure to stop her, but always effort. Said Montana right-wing bills would kill trans people. She was then silenced by the procedure, kicked out of floor debate. Our argument is how the trans debate mobilizes against trans people. And our unique moment of just saying because trans concerns that try to hold Michigan accountable always place us off limits you are judging, which reconstitutes trans capitalism as the only possible future debate. The one you see necessarily solves this because rejecting their performance disconnects their transphobic actions from a transphobic outcome and doesn't reward them, which means that I don't have to win that the case solves anything if I win, that rejecting them solves something. And it sort of answers all the arguments that they made about fairness. This sort of explains how risk goes for Perry, as we do not all enter from a neutral floor, so any negative cannot solve fairness in this debate. This debate becomes a question of unfair for who. You should make it unfair for Michigan if it allows trans students to prioritize what we need to get through debate now. If we were in any restrictions of capitalism that outweighs blood was the case and drops incommunicability thesis, the 2 hours too little, too late, that there's no way to prove what it feels like to be trans, so don't make me prove it to you. It's a cognitive bias kind of system. Also say what it feels like, so I'll presumptively outweigh comfort's impact of is so easy. They take models explicitly in the box of the impact transit tackle versus risk. Michigan is sad about their win loss. Be so fucking for real. Their 2-hour answer from the crowd K is just not responsive because they indicted incommunicability as a method of political organizing. We said that this is not us, but rather the frame for how you understand transness. Is that there are no words to explain what trans life feels like, which means it's not our method of organizing. That's fake. Incommunicability is a frame for impacts. Now the asphalt faith is good. Impact turns our fairness. Then if it's unfair for trans people to secure the basic existence, who gives a fuck? Drop the trans argumentation enables things like DIY HRT and when I say performance shots in the thighs is material, imperative, existential, and how argumentative connections I form the debate allow me to get on things like DIY HRT, which means that before detransition means you ought to be willing to forego saving the activity or recuperating fairness or procedural norms if that's what it takes to let trans people get. But we need now the role of balance is to lead with faith. The winner is so bad here in the Schumer it's not safe today. It's not unfair or regressive. It's judge instruction will counsel the better rating. Remember the Schumer is reliant on my heat, so we can't waive case impacts. Rather than consider parity, fairness, and transit tax loans, this is necessary. The impact. Yours communicative abandonment. This is impact on health procedures. Never show up for trans people. Remember the Schumer has no way to solve the case, and or a way that we can participate in their model, which means that the procedures do not show up for how trans technically can navigate debate. It means the case is a huge impact on everything that they've said in this debate because it locks in trans technicalism as the only way for trans participation. It does. This is proven in the Schumer. I think that way, but they're like, it doesn't matter if we're transphobic, they were not talk about app that. Which sort of is the way that they always cop out and abandon trans people now. But should we testing argument? I'm going to answer it here before I go to fairness and answer everything else. You can't go for no fairness based on presumption when we said you should lose because you're trans agnostic, so you only evaluate choosing offense only. You still vote out. We don't need to win the one who sees that I didn't win, which was the way our ballot solves the case argument. And this is just pure technical by them dropping the atmospheric and negative with critical purpose of the ecosystem debate, which means you wouldn't be dead on presumption. Remember that subject formation does not answer the case. We don't need to win that we make Michigan better people, just that the LAC is good and our offense is good for trans people, which rejecting them necessarily solves framework. They have no explanation of internal impact of why they care about fairness. They are purely going for everyone is invested in. We have a specific critique of their performances to make extended in every speech, even when you have to evaluate fairness. It does not entail that fairness outweighs transparency. We transparent them. See how trans people even get fairness in the first place. The ballot solves our often sweet. He says the ballot solves by disconnecting Michigan's transformative actions rhetoric from the reward. The ballot boxes the answer and Rosie says an egg on presumption claims are less relevant. The burden for absolute hard disproving. Even get to perform transformations for rejecting that solves subject for is well explained in the case. No paradox. Even if we're invested in fairness, that does not prove. And the sort of mode of the game doesn't prove of adjudicated fairness is like separate from that. You can evaluate the debate fairly and conclude that you don't need to reject unfair argumentation. The sort of thing that I need to do here is the surrogacy. It's an impact term to we include you too, and sort of the procedures are neutral and underlie everybody. They have straight dropped the last one in the last one in the 1 R, the differential labor extraction, and sort of argument about how we have to tell them how they to engage us. This is the answer to all the negation would be bad for you stuff because it's always about how can we make Michigan happy, how can we labor for them to have a fair experience debate, how can we avoid Cyrus' sad days, but never how can they labor for us to enable our experience debate, which is an impact term. The idea that 200 is not a substantive debate, or TVA in it, they cannot solve any of our offensive win fatigue as policy teams. Doesn't matter. We think that policy teams should lose at their own game when they reach dumb ass against their dumb ass against K teams. The paradox is relevant answer that above. There's no false positives because the false positive things is so awful because they're like you have a competitive incentive to lie when you call it trans antagonism. Our argument is that this is always the cop-out of how you don't talk to trans women. So it doesn't matter what they've said about fairness. We've said that they have a prior claim to that the ballot solves about how they were trans antagonistic, and then unfairness is good in that instance because fuck Michigan. Good debate.
soon.
Come again, Brian. My headset.
Oh, do we? There, this space back over here. What? Where? What?
Well, I just slapped her dog.
Is that one? I don't know. This is true. Okay, well. That's really, yeah, that's a tough guy. So we kind of have three. You had three years. This was last part. This judge on this panel is just long first. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Yeah, check your list. That's a 2-1. I got TJ. TJ. Wait, that's not hard to do. As long as they keep that. Oh, you can reach it. You can turn it back that way.
Alright, sorry about that.
Mission good.
We're good, Kate. Yeah.
Alright, congrats for making it to NDT, great debate, the decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative.
I sat very narrowly. I thought this debate was incredibly frustrating to resolve. I gave the win. To be honest, I'm not super happy with it because Neg, I thought y'all fumbled quite a bit. I'm going to be pretty critical of y'all throughout this. That's not a personal indictment, but it is the case that there's a lot you'll need to change. And y'all, I know it can feel shitty and patronizing to hear this while being handed a loss, but like, look, y'all thought there was a lot to hear. For whatever it's worth, I think it would be quite good for you two with some tweaks. But you two were smart, sound great. I'll have some thoughts. Depending on how much time we have here, I'll talk about that a little bit, but then I'll also have to share some more after if that's of interest. Top line thing, although I think this conceals a lot, is I voted negative to endorse the idea that I can agree that the app is right about everything and believe and affirm that matters, while agreeing that the app did not meet the resolutional burden of proof without which it's good for there to not be a burden of rejoinder arises. So it's good for the neg to not have to, in order to win the debate, rejoin non-topical affirmatives. For reason of, yeah.
So hot in here.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's just like that. This is like, yeah. Okay, sorry, I'm coming from.
No, you're fine.
Okay,
Um,
sorry, keep going.
Yeah, core offense there. I mean, there's tiny fairness thing, maybe I'll talk about that more in a minute. I think the bigger thing here is like both teams appear to be largely in agreement that nothing is like quote unquote solved by voting F, with an important asterisk of like rejecting the stuff they did. I'll talk about that in a minute. Preview of coming events, I thought that should have been a little bit more of a centerpiece and impacted that a little bit more. But voting negative does keep who wins anchored in the question of who did the better debating on a little bit of more level even playing field. Most importantly, though, again, it means that that we aren't producing a structure sidebar. That's what the 200 characterizes like ground and limit stuff, which they sort of cannot read independently for predictability thing. But the important bit here is like that avoids a structure that the negative says link turns y'all's lines of offense a couple of ways, right? So voting neg here both means that like it doesn't make them sad or whatever, but it also means that insofar as part of what is going on here is like who like that kind of in around things that people do or say connect to like who should win or lose, that like it is bad. It is particularly violent to produce a structure in which the neg is in the position of being like, it is, you know, bad for, like, you're wrong about the set of claims you're making about trans debate, or it's bad, or like, it's bad for you to have like said so. And also the 2NR points out, and like 2AR doesn't on point respond to, although with some other app stuff, I wouldn't have cared as much about that. I'll get to that in a minute. But 2NR also points out, and 2AR drops the argument that that structure is actually net worse slash, you know, worst for the people who are most structurally disadvantaged because of the fact that it means that the affirmative can, as long as they can internally justify any given argument, that like they can choose to read that as now. Now, the stuff that I just said there, I do think that those bits are here and those arguments are assorted. I do not think any of that stuff was like the centerpiece of the 2NR. I thought it should have been. I think that I just explained it in more depth than y'all did at any point. I was lacking a couple of things that would be needed on y'all's end to just like immediately pull the trigger for the app and ultimately end up spending a lot of time kind of hunting for them. Namely, first, I thought that it was deeply weird for y'all to make the move of contending at a couple of points in the debate that you are not defending a model, that it is only a question of this individual debate. First of all, I don't think that really makes sense. I don't think that's ever really true, as y'all can briefly point out in CX. But also, I think that it's extremely dangerous. A version of this 2AR that's like, look, they have said it's just about this individual debate. So it's just a question of like who you make sad, and it is better to make them sad. Here's why. I think that would have been very powerful. I think even without that, you do have some of those pieces in the same way that, again, like we should have been a centerpiece of the 2NR, but like they had some of the pieces I just described. The key thing that was missing for me is like either a little bit, you know, like a response to a couple of the TikTok things that I alluded to, the 2NR positive, but like didn't have as much of a defense of, or preferably just like a little bit more legwork done in the, like a little bit more time, a few more sentences, a kind of more warranted explanation in the 2AR for like why it is good to make them feel bad for the set of things they did. And I think that I'm there, right? So like the 2AR kind of, I thought that it was correct. I thought it was the right move given this debate and the way it played out for you to start off by pivoting away from like, we need to win the like the internal content of the app is good or whatever, and in the direction of like case of the stuff that they have said. The problem is at the point that the thing you were critiquing is the fact that they were like, not we shouldn't have to engage with you, but rather you should vote negative if they have like not met their burden of proof / the negative shouldn't be tasked with quote unquote rejoining, as in like negating, saying it was wrong, the concept of the 1EC. Like I think that again, this would have been a lot more lot cleaner if the neg kind of unpacks that argument, but in the absence of them doing so, I would have been very readily on like, here is why it is good for debates to be basically essentially like punishment paradigm good almost, right? Just like a little bit of liquor to kind of impact that out. And I think that I'm at. Alternatively, I think that you all keep saying they dropped the truth testing thing. I think that they are right. That doesn't make a great deal of sense here. It's like, what do you mean you want me to test the truth of this affirmative? And I think that the 2AR says some of that, but packaged, at least in my read of it, after poring over it a bunch in ways that are pretty much exclusively defensive. If you're like embedded in that is y'all staking out the position that a reason that it is good for you to have to rejoin us, or sorry, that it's good for you to not have to rejoin us, is something about like the premise that the 1EC is a thing that needs to be tested. Like, I don't know, I think that there are some premises being staked out there that like I could be convinced to like pull the trigger on based on the pieces you have here. And then finally, more broadly, I just like, I also think that y'all have all of the pieces necessary here to win pretty decisively in front of me on like your model of debate is better / their model of debate is bad, in the sense that you all keep characterizing, like the app consistently throughout the debate isn't, I think doing a pretty good job of being like, look, it's not that fairness doesn't matter. It's not that procedural fairness and structural fairness aren't different. Rather, it is that like the game needs to be, you know, sort of fair enough, or like, and the question of what it means for it to be fair and stuff, all / why we care, all ultimately is question begging of like what it is that we're trying to get out of this, why we're participating in this activity. And I thought that some of that kind of got lost in the 2AR in ways that still are totally compatible with you making the pivot that you did and to it being more kind of K of them, right? It's like, for example, independent of that they should feel like you should vote against them to make them feel sad because they did a bad thing. Also being like, a myopic focus on fairness at any cost is like actively antagonistic to the notion of debate having normative values that extend outside of itself, or even that like matter for us internal to it, which I thought y'all were excellent on a lot of that in CX. I just like I couldn't really put the pieces together based on this 2AR to like articulate what that would be or what it would look like, or like why I should care about that, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so I guess let's see, other bits. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. So like TLDR for you all, adjustments. One, I would advise, again, like there are a variety of places where you say stuff that adds up to making a debate incrementally more fair should be an overriding consideration, which I think is both extremely critiquable and also lacks, it's a premise that collapses in on itself, such as question begging. It's like, for why though, right? It's like flipping a coin, perfectly fair, but also pointless. Like, what the fuck are we doing? And I think that they were much better earlier in the debate on like the fact that like it is reasonable for part of our engagement, like for debates to be partly about what is it that we are doing here and why is it a thing we should care about. Second, like I said earlier, I think being like staking out sort of a very explicit, like the only thing that matters is the outcome of this individual debate / that's the only thing the ballot can connect to, I think will backfire more often than not. And then third is just like, be very careful about some of the claims that y'all like make and the ways that you package them. Because I do think that there were a bunch of places where just like parts of your argument engaged with and were contextualized to the stuff they were saying, and parts of it were not, in ways that like read as not great, and sort of continued a trend that I think started in 6 to 1AC with the like, y'all said X when like, or like, what did you mean by X? And they were like that. We said that in prior debates. We did not see that here.
I said the wrong place. Hold up.
Yeah. No, like again, none of this is like y'all suck as people or anything like that. Just like general vibes, advice. Sorry, I know that was like not the most structured. I spent most of that time kind of working through how I thought the pieces fit together and less time thinking through how to convey it. So open for questions in your hour at the end.
Yeah. Can we ask them now? Is that okay with them? Okay. So 3 things. First, you talked about like maybe a 2AR that's a little bit more focused on model debate. By that, do you mean like a 2AR that's more like how we relate to debate is important? Because like obviously AFT's not proposing like a definition of the resolution or whatever. But by those model debate claims, do you mean a 2AR that sounds a little bit more like here's what debate should be for, here's why it's valuable, here's how we should participate in it? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, so I think it depends on which. So it could be that. It could also be like the 2ARs, like they don't have a way of evaluating fairness versus transness. Their argument is just that you shouldn't be the case. They're like, we've impact turned their premise. And the most explanation I ever get of like the place where this is, I think, explained in the most depth in terms of what you mean by like we've impact turned it, is when you're like, trans concerns that try to hold Michigan accountable are always labeled as off limits. And then at the very end, you say, quote, the last sentence of the speech, false positives, this is a cop out of how they don't talk to trans folks, prior question of them being trans antagonistic, unfairness is good in that instance because fuck Michigan. I would have needed more elaboration on why a model of like fuck Michigan is good.
So then that was actually my second question is like, what do you, for at least for you, what's like the ideal argument set for like, I don't know, punishment paradigm is probably not who we relate with here, but that's.
Yeah, but like essentially, it's like, it is, I should also say as a sidebar, or kind of taking a step back, a thing that definitely inflected, like, given the difficulty of like, in this to an R and to A, or if anything, like, just actually resolve it for me, a thing that definitely kind of like inflected some of which way I ended up leaning is like, if the 1AR unpacks some of this a little bit more, then maybe that amount in the 2AR is enough, even if it's not ideal. Alternatively, I think the 1AR definitely had all the pieces you need, but I think the 2AR needs to unpack it a little bit more, if that makes sense.
One of the two speeches.
Right, exactly. In terms of what I mean about, and part of that also is just like protect the neg type, leans. In terms of what I mean by that, or like what arguments I find most compelling. I mean, I think being like I do think that ultimately debaters respond to competitive incentives, and they sort of weirdly kind of advocated the terrain of like caring about that. And y'all, from the outset, I think say various things that are very compatible with caring about that. Y'all are saying like winning at any cost is not like ought not be the goal and stuff. Like maybe not in as many words, but it's like y'all are like fairness matters, but it's not the only thing or the overriding consideration. That's extremely compatible with such, I think, kind of almost another way of phrasing the premise that it's like the debate game needs to have some value. So again, your offense in that 2AR can either be like, here is the value that our model produces, or it can be, here is why their model is bad. And at the point that their model is, as like at the point they've let y'all kind of successfully characterize them being like, we shouldn't have a burden of rejoinder relative to the staff as them not kind of engaging with you, passionate, et cetera, or have a link to other stuff they've said, like truth testing stuff or whatever, them being like, vote out because it is good to force them to kind of confront and reconcile with that, is I think ultimately for me, generally more compelling than just like, the story that I think they were the ones telling in this debate of like, vote for us because it makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Like I don't, like as the one you see eloquently points out, it's like, we feel bad about debates all the time and stuff, and yet it's still, it's a thing we choose to do. And the question then is why? And it's like, it is productive for them to lose. I find more persuasive than just like they did a bet.
How do you think, so I think there's kind of two ways to explain this. One of them I think is the more like, they have to do that like internal reflection thing or whatever, but that seems like that kind of means that we need to answer subject formation stuff, which I don't think we want our offense to be reliant on.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's like, I don't think you need to win, because the scope of their offense here is so small, because they are just like, we feel that we will feel happier if we win this debate than if we lose it. It's just like any chance at all that them being sad connects to like, hey, maybe we should think about this a little bit, especially if it happens like frequently enough.
So then the second version of that is like, do you think a version of this argument that's like, okay, look, if the 2NR is like, I, Michigan ES really care about competitive incentives or whatever, then maybe them losing debate on saying bad things makes them less likely to do those things again, which then, or do you think that spots the negative too much?
No, I think that's fine. I also think, so one, yes to that. Two, in terms of like,
I mean, I feel like you still have to double down, like,
totally.
But I think double down is mutually exclusive with debaters care about competitive incentives, so.
Well, you can say like, I'm competitively incentivized to continue doing, like, I believe, there's some internal contradiction, but like, they can make the argument that I'm still competitively incentivized to do what I'm doing better. I'm internalizing the law. Like, they have arguments about why the loss they internalize isn't going to change their behavior, but rather incentivize them to beef up their strategy in a more,
But if they beef up their strategy to be less trans antagonistic, that would probably.
Well, I don't think that's what they're saying. They're
Yeah,
saying
I'm
they
just
don't
like,
think-
I'm trying, I don't know how to, this is like totally unrelated to the debate, just like, I don't know how to reconcile like,
I would say,
people react to competitive incentives with people react in ways that are unstrategic by refusing to change their arguments. Like, that seems the opposite of this.
One, right,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
one that, which I like for what it's worth, like I agree with you. I'd be very good for that argument. That's kind of the way that's where I ultimately end up on this, slash how I think about it. Two is I also think that there's like an additional kind of meta argument here that's the other way you could defend this desirable model of debate, which is, and if that's wrong, that demonstrates that their kind of reactionary transphobia exceeds kind of rational calculation. The question then is, why is that a good reason for them to lose? Which then, if you're like, and here's why it's good for debate as a community to adopt a model, but like when that is demonstrably true, judges should reject it. I would also be good for that. Does that make sense?
That's a. I don't think that we can. Do you have any questions? Sorry.
No, you're here, give him more question.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I evaluated it a little more cleanly, so I think, or I guess like I resolved it via this incommunicability thesis. I think I evaluated it a little more offensively, and it helps me pretty much provide sufficient defense of truth testing while then also impacting fairness. I think the app does need to make this argument a little more offensive and like explain why rendering transes, I guess, visible or knowable via Western epistemic regimes is bad and more like an explicit disad. But I think despite there not being an explicit response to this true testing presumption argument, the 2AC 1AR 2AR sets up it as a clear impact turn to true testing as a heuristic for determining the validity of the 1AC. And the app has consistently made this, there's like no mechanism for trans people to prove phenomenologically their experience of what it means to be trans. And that trans in the skull is constantly being invalidated, and ultimately provides sufficient defense for truth testing, but leaves fairness. And I think incommunicability is explained as a pretty good impact term to this, and is consistent about why the procedures of debate are inadequate for resolving trans violence via your don't say gay arguments. The app's abandonment thesis that explains why procedural fairness allows debaters to weaponize framework as a way to refuse engaging trans arguments. I think I agree with BK that this you do set this up as a uniqueness argument why unfairness is good, or like why voting app is a rejection of the next performance, or that affirms the decision to refuse justifying, I guess like a refusal to refuse their their requirement to justify your existence. But I think that does need to be couched more in like an offensive valid good for you argument. I think the certainty disad was also conceded into an argument and explained it as articulated as an explicit impact turn to reading a framework broadly. I think it explains like your interpretation forces this differential labor practice on trans debaters by forcing you to explain how you should engage the affirmative while failing to then do the reciprocal work of explaining how your model of fairness incentivizes labor being done on behalf of trans debaters, proven by your lack of a switch side debate claim or a TBA in this debate. The ballot pick didn't really matter to me. They didn't claim to change anyone's orientation of trans people, but I think there's enough for me that the ballot serves a rejection of the negative, and I get the words that I should at least not reward you for the way you've chosen to engage in affirmative. The paradox is where I'm left, I think, the most trouble. I think there's a world where the neg can, I think, win this fairness violation without while still losing truth testing and communicability. But I think the app is slightly ahead here in explaining why trans antagonism implicated within conceptions and application of fairness, both prior to the round and in the evaluation of their arguments. I think the neg hasn't really done a sufficient job explaining to you why competition proves your model of fairness is an intrinsic good. I do have some defense to explaining why things like fair judge evaluation is different from the procedures that are required in reading a certain act, et cetera. But I think the affirmative needs to do a better job indicting this argument specifically, maybe having a better, like a competition disad or some station of competition, or explaining how your theory of power would create a different form of relationality in debate, not centered around hyper-competitiveness, or why even just the equating of speech times, direct argument, et cetera, to the reading a topical app is like a false analogy that allows them to further abandon engaging in trans violence. But that's pretty much it.
My decision was largely like DJ's. I thought the app wins at trans antagonism, structural logic, which means that procedural fairness cannot be detached from the kind of context of the trans debate, which in turn means procedural fairness and the very premise of truth testing in the context of this particular debate round should be rejected. I think that 2NR would benefit from tying together the threads of why truth testing matters and why fairness matters a bit more strongly. Specifically, how can procedural fairness be insular from the other kinds of questions or contexts that implicate debate, and why the ballot can only resolve that impact, and or why that's a good theory of how debate ought to work, which is, I think, maybe a models question and not in this round question. I'm kind of struggling with identifying why I should care about procedural fairness in the context of a singular debate round, absent a kind of clear and strong explication on why fairness matters and is independently a good impact that I should prioritize in debate. So in terms of truth testing, I think the trans antithesis in terms of premise of truth testing, in that I think the AF wins that transness is untestable or unprovable, which is why the idea of faith in the trans experience is a good model or method. I think this, I think that also implicates fairness, in that I don't think that the fairness paradox independently proves that fairness is the only impact to debate. I did sit on the fairness paradox for a little bit. I think the surrogacy dissad answers the fairness paradox by proving that even if we should evaluate debates fairly, i.e. conceive arguments, speech times, et cetera, and so forth, surrogacy proves that there are other factors that implicate how debate is structured, which is something that can't be dissociated when we think about the ballot and when we think about who wins or loses a particular round. That being said, I think the 2AR should bring in some of those arguments about the ecosystem of debate, the social investments of debate, to just bolster the explanation of that argument a bit more, to provide just a bit more context on why debate can't be bracketed from those questions when thinking about procedural fairness. But I think the bulk of my decision is largely similar on, I think, that the transitarianism is a structural logic, which overdetermines how I think about truth testing and procedural fairness at the end of the round.
Something real quick for questions. Two lines I want to point to, like one from CX to the 1 and C and one from CX to the 2 and C that I think help contextualize to some degree kind of three decisions, at least in terms of encapsulating what to kind of adjust. Like CX to the 1 and C, you say, quote, the fairness violation occurs when we lose to an unpredictable app. Voting negative stops that from happening. And CX to the 2 and C, you say, quote, even if we can't resolve all structural unfairness, we should still try to make debate as fair as possible. I think both of those miss the boat a little bit. The argument, the question isn't like, do you win or lose this particular debate, nor is debate the fairest that it could possibly be, but rather, is it good for debate to operate according to a model in which the affirmative must affirm resolution and the negative must rejoin that? Or is it good for the advocate to say whatever they want to say? And like, that's the comparison, right? It's like, that also lets you be like, it is good for debates to be fair, including for like, we all put a lot into it reasons.
I think I have questions if I decide what I'm thought about it. Or I mean, I for sure will. If there was a complex debate right now, my brain is just kind of.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine.
Clear my head before we have another debate, so I'll definitely like
Yeah.
email. If you want, but I don't have anything as of now.
I know it's also like very critical, but I will say like, y'all sound great. There was a lot of good stuff here. I think it's more just like conceptually, how do these pieces fit together?
I have a question, one more question for you, BJ. It seems like teams like to go for like polar opposite 2NRs, either like it's only this debate and only fairness can be solved by the ballot, or it's about model debate and your model debate is bad. Do you think that the way that we are currently explaining offense operates if the negative makes a modeling argument? Like, are like you did bad thing in this debate arguments seem like they sometimes struggle if the negative is like, well, the only thing they do is that our model debate is broadly good. How do you like what would the language that I think would bridge those things? What are the language that could bridge those things? Honestly, for everyone, but like that's just something I'm thinking about a lot, especially because it's often unclear which of these arguments the 2NR is going to go for until they go for it.
Sure. I mean, I think that much like the negative can make arguments about why either of those ways of adjudicating these things are good, and then in that frame, why when y'all can do the same, right? So it's like you could, let's say they go for it's a question of models, you could either give the 2R that's like your model is bad, or your model, your thing forecloses our model and our model's good. Or you could give the 2AR that's like, it's actually bad for it. Like, our model is that it is bad for it to just be kind of an abstract question of models, and instead it is good for us to decide stuff on the basis of what occurs in debates, and here's why I think they did is bad. And so I think that it's less like, yeah, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does.
And it's like similarly, they go for like, only this debate matters, you can be like, concede that, here's why our offense about that, waste their offense about that. Or you could be like, wrong, who wins or loses an individual debate doesn't like change anything. What actually matters is like the competitive incentives produced by the structure of the debate over time, blah, blah, blah. Like,
I think, yeah, I mean, naturally, I feel like your offense is able to function in both realms. I think I'm not as persuaded by like the microaggression strategy unless there's something like explicitly done in the round that I'm like, oh yeah, that's fucked up, maybe a characterization of an argument or the way that something responded that is flagged and explicitly impacted out. It becomes hard for me to evaluate. Like only a question of this round matters absent that clear link. But I'm naturally understanding a lot of your arguments on both levels. And I think, in my opinion, you would want it to be at the level of models because it requires you to do a lot more work to explain why the reading of framework itself, I guess, is somehow outweighed by fairness violation, requires some pretty extensive impact calculus.
So for you would take it like slightly better for like their model is bad then?
Yeah, absolutely.
I also am much better for that, in part just because I think the neg argument in response that's just like, if it's really bad, it should not be, the valid not sufficient remedy is like good or tap, whatever, and if it's not that bad, then like, whatever.
So the same thing, models question, I also kind of wish it serves to just add in a context with models, because I understood it as an argument about just like a critique of neutrality.
Thank you. We haven't had either. So I'm just trying to get.
I really like the argument that like not providing a suicide debate claim or TV proves the desire not to engage is interesting. Maybe like performatively, like there's a thing, it requires you thinking of crafty things and then impacting out and sitting on them more, but like, I don't know, for me that's always a scary position to be in, and just impacting them.
How are we supposed to say switch side in debating when that doesn't have very much to do with like, I guess that are more tied to like critiques of hegemonic climate politics, maybe or renewables or things of that nature.
Oh, like, I guess how would you make a suicide debate claim?
I mean, yeah, but the act doesn't really have much to talk to.
I mean, I think you could easily make a suicide debate claim though. Like, why isn't, I guess, refusal to engage the affirmative because of trans antagonism not an effective way to like, I guess at the content level include this argument? You haven't provided like a unique reason why reading this argument on the affirmative is necessary.
What would the net even look like?
I mean, a link with an alternative.
What's the okay, sure. I guess maybe I'm just wrong.
My angle on that would be less in this particular debate because of the nature of the one I see, a little bit less like, here's an app or an agreement that solved this, and more like, here is an explanation of why prioritizing kind of prior procedural matter to the affirmative meet the resolution burden of proof is not at all kind of mutually exclusive with their premise that like we should care about why we're doing this, including especially in ways that are sensitive to transness.
Definitely not something you have to, I mean, everyone fairness, not something you have to do in this particular debate, but like in a world where you're sitting on class, I just think it's an interesting argument to think like, oh, you explain why your interpretation is good for you, but then not contextualize how you could include the winners within your world.
Thanks everyone for waiting. Thanks for reporting, Hannah.